I didn't leave my old faith, and I didn't fully belong to my new one either. That's the part people rarely understand. They think belief is a door. You close one side, you open another. Simple, clean, finished. But my life didn't change like that. It felt more like standing in a narrow space between two moving walls. Not pushed out completely, not welcomed in completely. Just held there, suspended. In that space, every step is watched. Every silence is questioned. Every word sounds like a confession, even when it isn't. Some people wanted me to explain myself. Others wanted me to choose. A few wanted me to disappear quietly so things could return to normal. But no one asked what it feels like to live in the middle. To wake up every day knowing that whichever direction you lean, something precious will fall behind you. This is not a story about changing religions. It is a story about what happens when your heart moves faster than the world around you, and you are left standing between two faiths. Before everything became complicated, my life had a clear shape. I knew where I belonged. There were familiar places where my name was spoken naturally, without hesitation. Faces that recognized me without needing explanations. Traditions that wrapped around my days like quiet instructions. This is how you live. This is how you believe. This is who you are. Belonging was not something I questioned. It was something I breathed. My faith was part of that structure. Not just a belief, but a language, a rhythm. A shared understanding that connected me to family, to history, to community. It told me where to stand, how to speak, what to honor. And in return, it gave me something powerful and fragile at the same time. Certainty. Certainty about my place in the world. Certainty about how others saw me. Certainty that I was not alone. I didn't wake up wanting a different life. I wasn't searching for a new identity. I wasn't trying to challenge anyone. I wasn't planning to step outside the lines that had already been drawn for me. If someone had told me back then that one day I would feel like a stranger in rooms that once felt like home, I would have laughed. Some stories only make sense after they begin. The change didn't arrive like a storm. There was no announcement, no dramatic collapse. No single night that divided my life into before and after. It began quietly, with thoughts that lingered longer than they should have, with questions that refused to stay buried, with a sense that something inside me was being gently pulled in a direction I had not planned. At first, I resisted it. I told myself it was temporary, that confusion was human, that doubt was harmless. But it wasn't confusion. It was clarity moving slowly, not demanding, not loud, just persistent, like a voice that doesn't interrupt your life, but waits for you to notice it. I didn't wake up one morning ready to abandon everything I knew. I only knew that something within me had shifted, and pretending otherwise began to feel dishonest. So I listened, not to replace what I believed, not to erase my past, but to understand why my heart no longer rested where it used to. That was the moment my life became complicated. Because once the inside changes, the outside eventually follows. And not everyone is ready for that. I didn't leave my old world, but I no longer fit inside it. At first, nothing was said out loud. People are careful with change. They sense it before they name it. Conversations became lighter, safer, unfinished. Certain topics quietly disappeared when I entered the room. Questions were asked indirectly, wrapped in concern or humor. In familiar spaces, I felt unfamiliar, not rejected, just repositioned. As if I had been moved slightly to the edge of a photograph where I once stood in the center. In the new spaces I began to visit, things were different. People were kind, curious, welcoming in careful ways. But belonging has layers. Trust takes time. Understanding takes history. And I carried a history that didn't fully translate. To some, I was still shaped by where I came from. To others, I had already changed too much. I learned how it feels to explain yourself without being asked. How it feels to measure every word, to soften every sentence, to live with the awareness that no matter what you say, someone will hear something else. I was no longer fully part of what I had been, and not yet fully part of what I was becoming. So I learned how to exist in the space between introductions, between assumptions, between expectations, between two worlds that looked at each other across me. It didn't stay subtle forever. At some point, silence turns into suspicion, and suspicion becomes a question that refuses to go away. People began to ask it carefully at first, not directly, not openly. In quiet conversations, in concerned messages, in sentences that sounded gentle but carried weight. So, where do you really stand? I heard it from different voices, from people who cared about me, from people who were confused by me, from people who were uncomfortable with the space I occupied. They didn't all use the same words, but they were asking the same thing. Are you with us? Or are you with them? As if faith were a side in a conflict. As if belief were a uniform you had to wear clearly so others could recognize you from a distance. Some asked out of fear, some out of loyalty, some out of the need for order. They wanted something simple, a sentence that could be repeated, a label that could be explained, a position that could be defended. What they didn't want was a story. They didn't want uncertainty. They didn't want complexity. They didn't want a human answer. They wanted a direction, left or right, in or out, with us or without us. And the longer I stayed silent, the heavier that question became. What they didn't see was the argument already happening in my head. It was louder than any conversation around me. Every question they asked outside had already been asked inside. What will I lose if I answer honestly? Who will walk away? Who will stay silent? Who will never look at me the same again? I tried to imagine every possible future. In one version, I chose clarity. I spoke in simple sentences. I accepted the distance that followed. In another, I stayed undefined. Careful, soft, always incomplete. Neither future felt peaceful. One promised honesty with isolation. The other promised belonging with a quiet kind of self-erasure. Some nights, I wished the change had never happened, not because I regretted what I felt, but because I was tired of carrying it alone. I missed the simplicity of being understood without explanation. I missed walking into a room without preparing myself. I missed not being a question. And yet, every time I imagined choosing comfort over truth, something inside me resisted. Not with anger, with weight. The kind that settles in your chest when you know a lie would be easier, but heavier to live with. That was the real conflict. Not between religions, but between visibility and peace. Between honesty and safety. Between becoming smaller or standing alone. There wasn't a single dramatic scene where everything suddenly became clear. No raised voices, no final speech, no door closing behind me. It was quieter than that. It happened the first time I realized I was editing my own thoughts before speaking them. The first time I reshaped a sentence so no one would feel uncomfortable. The first time I nodded at something I no longer believed, just to keep the room calm. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't protecting others. I was slowly disappearing. I stood in front of a mirror one night and tried to recognize myself in the silence I was practicing. And I couldn't. So I stopped negotiating with my own conscience. I stopped trying to find a sentence that would satisfy everyone. I accepted something difficult. There was no answer that would keep all my relationships intact. No explanation that would make every side feel safe. No version of the truth that would sound gentle enough to avoid loss. The choice was not between two religions. It was between living as a shadow or living as myself. So I chose clarity. Not because I wanted conflict, not because I wanted distance, but because I could no longer survive as someone half present in his own life. That decision did not make me brave. It made me visible. And visibility has a cost. Clarity does not arrive gently. It rearranges things. After I stopped hiding, the world did not collapse, but it shifted. Some people stepped closer, others stepped back. A few disappeared without explanation. Conversations changed tone. Familiar warmth became careful politeness. Certain doors stayed closed longer than they used to. Nothing dramatic, just distance learning how to speak. I lost the comfort of being undefined. I lost the protection that comes from blending in. I lost the luxury of moving through rooms without being interpreted. But I gained something unexpected. Weight. Not the kind that drags you down, the kind that anchors you. For the first time in a long while, my words matched my silence. My presence matched my beliefs. I no longer had to divide myself into versions. There was still loneliness. There were still misunderstandings. But there was also a strange calm in knowing I was no longer negotiating my own existence. I was not standing in the middle anymore. I was standing in truth, even if it meant standing alone. I don't tell this story to prove anything, not to defend myself, not to convince anyone, not to turn doubt into certainty. I tell it because there are people living quietly in the same narrow space I once stood in. People who feel too different for one world and too changed for the other. People who are tired of explaining, tired of choosing words like stepping on glass, tired of being reduced to a question mark. If that is you, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not confused beyond repair. You are not weak for feeling pulled in two directions. Sometimes growth does not look like moving forward. It looks like standing still while everything familiar rearranges itself around you. Sometimes faith does not place you on one side or the other. Sometimes it places you alone. And that can be frightening. But it can also be honest. I am no longer trying to belong everywhere. I am trying to be whole somewhere, even if that place is quiet. Even if it is misunderstood. Even if it costs me the comfort of certainty. Because living divided is louder than living alone. And I would rather be truthful in silence than accepted in a lie. That is what it means for me to live between two faiths.